Greetings all. Now we come to verse 39 of the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra. And this is good timing because verse 39 teaches a foundational practice of classical Tantrik Yoga. The practice of uccāra, which we could translate as elevation or enunciation, is the practice of raising a bīja-mantra through the central channel. It is part of nada yoga, the yoga of sound. It is part of laya yoga, the yoga of dissolution, right? Because these phrases never denote parts of the tradition that are divided from each other, right? They overlap. And so we can use the term Tantrik Yoga, Nada Yoga, Laya Yoga. They're all overlapping in the case of uccāra. So the practice is simple in its essence, but it has quite a few little details that make it more powerful that I want to share with you. So first we can just check out the verse from the Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra. And here, not much detail is given, precisely because this was already a well-known practice by the middle of the 9th century. And indeed, through the entire period of classical Tantra from, let's say 700 to the year 1200, it was a central practice. And it continues all the way down to the present day. It just became a little less central, partially because the bijas utilized in uccāra were originally embedded in sometimes highly complex mantra systems that faded into the background a bit after the Muslim conquest. So uccāra is still practiced today in India, though that word is not used so frequently, whereas it was a very ubiquitous term in the original tradition. So you might have learned this practice under another name. Okay, here's the verse. It is in your chat window. Let's see. Here we go. In Sanskrit first. praṇavādi-samuccārāt plutānte śūnya-bhāvanāt śūnyayā parayā śaktyā śūnyatām bhairavī. Which means, O goddess Bhairavi, by performing complete uccāra of the praṇava-mantra and meditating on the void at the end of its protracted sound, one enters into śūnyatām, the spacious openness, by means of the void which is the supreme power. So there's actually a lot going on in this verse, even though the author hasn't given many of the subtle little details of the practice, because again, the author only has 32 syllables to work with. He or she was writing in Anushtubh meter, which is 16 syllables per line, 2 lines, 32 syllables. And so you got to fit in what you want to say in that context. And although the author does sometimes give more than one verse to a single practice, that's the exception. Almost always each practice is a single verse in this text. And again, the details were already known to people at that time. But let's break down the words of the verse a little bit more. So he says, or she, whoever the original author was, of course it's attributed to Bhairava, who has a masculine gender, so we could say he. Due to performing complete uccāra of the praṇava-mantra, praṇavādi-samuccārāt in Sanskrit, that's the first pada, the first quarter of the verse. Okay, so what's interesting here, I couldn't quite translate it without interrupting the flow, is that he says pranava, etc. He says, due to performing some uchara, complete uchara of the pranava, etc. So one should do, or one should utilize the pranava-mantra, or indeed any fundamental bīja-mantra in this practice. So to understand this better, we simply look to the commentary, something that sadly not all the translators of this text in the 20th and 21st centuries have done. But if we look at the commentary, we have some useful information there from Shivopadhyaya. And he says, he gives 3 pranavas, 3 bīja-mantras, which might be considered a pranava. Pranava means a primordial vibration, a cosmic hum, if you will, is the meaning of pranava. Literally means kind of a vibration or hum. But the word pranava is used to denote foundational bīja-mantras. So in each system, in each tantra, there's usually only one pranava per lineage, one pranava per tantra. So it's important to know what the pranava-mantra in your lineage is, if you have a lineage. But anyway, Shivopadhyaya says, the Veda pranava, the pranava in the Vedas, of all the Vedas, is Om. And he says the Shiva pranava is HAUM. And the Maya pranava is Hrim. And it has to be understood here that in Tantra, the word Maya does not have a negative connotation as it does for the Vedantins. This is, in fact, a key differentiation between Tantra and Vedanta. That Maya has no negative connotation. Maya is the creative power of the absolute, the creative power of consciousness. So since the universe is not a mistake, it's that it's here, therefore Maya is a beautiful thing. Maya is the power by which the one appears as many. And of course, that act entails suffering and delusion, but it also entails joy and awakeness and aliveness, and it entails everything. The movement from unity into apparent diversity within that unity is Maya. So it's Maya is understood in the tantric sources to be the projection within the field of consciousness of diverse content. So anyway, the point is Maya pranava, that's a positive term there. The pranava of the feminine creative power of consciousness is Hrim. So he gives us these 3 bījas, and indeed these are 3 fundamental bījas in the tantric tradition. The only one he leaves out is the really important pranava mantra HAUM. And HAUM is in fact a tantric form of Om. Okay, so going back to the verse. So one should do uchara, elevation of one of these bija mantras. And one should do it in pluta fashion, protracted fashion, okay? So what does that mean? Well, you could do a bija mantra in hraswa, dirgha, or pluta fashion, short, long, or extended. So for example, hraswa, short, is when a bija mantra is part of a longer mantra, like Om Namah Shivaya. That's the short enunciation of Om. Or you could do it in a longer enunciation where it's still part of a longer mantra, like Om Hrim Namah Shivaya. There it's dirgha, it's longer. But to do it pluta, protracted, you have to devote your entire exhale to a single enunciation of that mantra. So, for example, Om, giving the entire exhale to the enunciation of a single bija. Now, a remnant of this practice does, of course, exist in modern yoga classes. In most modern yoga classes around the world, or a lot of them anyway, people say, let's begin with 3 long Oms. And they sing Om with a full exhale. That's a pluta or protracted enunciation of Om. We don't really have a good translation in English for pluta, but this is basically what it means. Now, is that it? Is that the whole practice? Just to go Om with your whole exhale? No, that is not the whole practice. In fact, what people are doing in the yoga classes is literally a fragment, a tiny remnant of the practice, because the full practice hasn't come down into modern yoga. It's still only found in Tantrik Yoga. It's not even found in Hatha Yoga, just Tantrik Yoga, the full practice. So what is the full practice? Okay, so I'm going to outline it simply, and then I'm going to outline it again with more detail. Okay, it's really important to learn this correctly. So in the full practice, you breathe in and down to the pelvic floor. You're breathing and bringing the prana all the way down to Muladhara. And then you do a gentle Mula Bandha. And then you begin the enunciation of the mantra and feel, if you can, or else just imagine, that the bīja-mantra is rising from the base of the body, from the pelvic floor, and it's rising through the central channel all the way up to the nasal cavity. Okay, so if it helps, if you're a visual person, you can visualize the bīja-mantra as a single point of brilliant light, and that point of brilliant light is rising through the central channel as you enunciate the mantra. Okay, so only do that if it's effective for you. That's an optional part of the practice, to visualize the nada as bindu, the sound resonance as a point of light rising up. Okay, so the mantra rises fairly rapidly through the central channel and then reaches the nasal cavity, and it hovers there or hesitates there. Why? I don't want to get into the complicated details about this, but it is said in Tantrik Yoga that there is a blockage, an energy blockage in the energy body or subtle body just above the palate and just below the third eye in the nasal cavity. And this blockage is called Maya Granthi, the knot of Maya. And here the term Maya specifically means perceiving plurality instead of unity, right? And so Maya Granthi is also called, of course, Rudra Granthi in some sources, but Maya Granthi emphasizes the fact that if you break through this psychic knot in there, then you are able to see unity or oneness as fundamentally real, instead of plurality or separation or difference as fundamentally real. So it's important that in the Tantric Yoga tradition, this is not just a kind of cognitive shift that you, oh, I saw things as multiple, and now I see oneness. You can't. It's not just a cognitive shift. You can have a glimpse of it in that way, but there has to be an actual fundamental shift in the energy body for that to become a sustainable mode of perception. Okay, so for that reason, we hold the mantra there at the nasal cavity, vibrating that Rudra Granthi or Maya Granthi intensely, and so that it begins to break apart. So with repeated uchara, and we're talking, somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 iterations of the bīja-mantra, then that Granthi will completely break apart and dissolve. And it's actually kind of similar to the principle of the sonic shower on the NASA space shuttle. They can't take a shower with water in free fall orbit, right? So they take sonic showers. They've got a sonic device that vibrates a frequency at just the right sonic, it's not audible, they're just the right inaudible sonic frequency that it actually vibrates the dirt off the bodies of the astronauts. So that's a real thing, sonic shower. So in the same way, a sound vibration can displace, it can break up and displace a blockage. And indeed, it can do so for any blockage within the central channel, not just the Rudra Granthi or Maya Granthi. So that's just the default. The default place of pause in this practice is here in the nasal cavity. So what's the other principle, key principle of Uccāra practice? Well, I'll demonstrate. There's no M. There's no M in Om or in Hreem or in Hum or in any of these bijas that we do pronounce with an M when we're speaking. So spoken, we have different usages in spoken Sanskrit and in yogic practice and in sung Sanskrit as well. So there's no M. There's never an M when you're doing Uccāra. The lips should never touch, okay? And so if we were going to just make one change, one tweak to how it's done in yoga classes around the world today, where everyone says, let's chant 3 long Oms. If there were just one tweak, and I think in that context of modern yoga classes, there should only be one tweak, which is, there's no M. It's just Om. In other words, the sound rises into the nasal cavity, and then it continues rising through the head, and the subtle sound vibration rises up and out of the head. So I'll talk about that more in just a moment. So how do you do this? It's simple. You just open up the I don't know the anatomical language exactly. Is it the glottis? No. Anyway, you open up the back of the throat and the nasal passages, and you let the sound come through the nasal passage as well as the oral cavity. And then it crossfades into a kind of hum, but with a slightly open mouth. And then it fades into silence, okay? So practice doing this. It's really important for the practice. The practice cannot work without this important detail, that we go from oral sound to oral nasal to pure nasal. And that is exactly why Om is spelled O-N-G in some branches of the tradition, such as in Bengali or East Indian traditions will spell it O-N-G. Also, Sikh tradition spells it O-N-G. So we see that usage today in kirtan artists who come out of Sikh Dharma Kundalini Yoga background. They'll spell it and sing it O-N-G. And O-N-G is close. It's just not exactly O-N-G, because that involves a little bit more constriction in the back of the throat than we do in Uccāra practice. So it's not exactly ong, it's Om. So the back of my throat stays open, but it sounds like O-N-G because the sound is rising into the nasal cavity, which obviously gives it a nasal quality. Okay, lastly, it's really important, this part from the third eye to the Dwadashanta, okay? This is really important, which is that the sound fades out at the level of the third eye, right? So here is what's called nirodhika, and this was a term that was mentioned in an early VBT video. Nirodhika means the point beyond which no sound is audible, the impeder, because sound can't rise higher than, audible sound can't go higher than the upper limit of the sinus cavities, which is there. And so you need to learn to feel the subtle resonance of the mantra from here to here, and that's super important in the tradition, that there's actually 6 levels of subtle inaudible resonance of the mantra, 3 inside the head and 3 outside the head. I'm not going to get into those details now. It's enough just to know that when the sound fades out, you continue to feel the mantric energy rising up above your head, and you continue to let the jaw be relaxed, and you experience this moment of absolute stillness at the very upper limit of the energy body. When the mantric resonance reaches the upper limit of the energy body, it fades out completely. I mean, it's inaudible, of course, from here to here, but I mean, it dissolves completely at this level of vyapani, also known as unmana. Well, we'll sort out those details in a written post. Okay, so the verse mentions this under the name śūnya. Okay, so here the term śūnya is used to mean this upper limit of the energy body where the resonance of the mantra reaches its subtlest level. That's called śūnya in the verse. This is an atypical usage of the word śūnya that we find here in the VBT. Okay, so what's the verse say? Again, it says, by performing complete uchara of the pranava and meditating on the void at the end of its protracted sound, up here, the upper limit of the energy body, one enters into śūnyatā. We're familiar with this term from Buddhist traditions, but it's also a central term in Shaiva Tantrik Yoga. Śūnyatā is often translated as emptiness. I prefer, and I think it's more accurate to translate it as spacious openness. In this context, obviously in a Buddhist context, it makes sense to translate it as emptiness because it's related to an argument about things being empty of any independent essence. Here, it's something more kind of directly experiential rather than philosophical or conceptual, as it can be in Buddhism as well. Anyway, śūnyatā, spacious openness. One enters into spacious openness. How? By means of this void, which is the Parā-śakti, which is the supreme power. So it's said in Trika lineage that, here's the goddess right here. It's Parā-devi, happens to be above my head, but it's actually that she's above all of our heads. in the Trika lineage, it's said that the essence of Parā-devi, the supreme power, the subtlest form of Shakti, exists eternally at the upper limit of our energy body. And indeed, in tantric ritual, in puja, we do a process of summoning Parā-devi from the upper limit of our energy body down to the third eye and then beaming her into the center of the mandala. And in other practices, we summon her from the upper limit of the energy body down into our heart center. So depending on the practice, she is summoned, avahana, from the upper limit of the energy body to the third eye or the heart. So it's said that that essence, Shakti, the subtlest form of all Shakti that gives rise to all other Shaktis, exists eternally at the upper limit of the energy body. So by means of that void, which is the supreme power, one enters into this infinite spacious openness in the practice of uchara. So that's a bit of the theory behind the practice. Now, actually, I think what I'm going to do here is make the practice video separate so that you can just hit play on that over and over without having to go through all this dialogue. But it's important that you watch this before you watch the practice video, which will be shorter. So that's basically it. That's basically the practice of uchara. And I highly recommend that you do it for 9 minutes every day. Why 9 minutes? Because those who are energetically sensitive can be overstimulated by uchara. Kundalini can be overstimulated by uchara practice. And so just to be on the safe side, 9 minutes is a good length of time for the practice to not overstimulate your energy body or your kundalini. And for those who are very much the opposite of oversensitive, you could do it longer. Okay, so I'll be back in just a few minutes with the practice video. Oh, and I see there's a couple questions. Barbara says, I thought the void was the penultimate supreme power. Yes, when you're talking in terms of the 5-layered self. You always got to know which model you're using, right? Because in that model, the void is specifically a term that denotes the sensationless void of almost pure Shiva without Shakti. That is what the void means in the 5-layered self model, right? Which is perfectly valid. It's just analyzing in that way. And here we're talking about the void in a different way. We're talking about it as this ultimately refined energy that in the microcosm of the human being is at the upper limit of the energy body. So again, the terms will change their meaning depending on which model you're utilizing in a particular verse or text or area of discourse. That's so important. You've got to know your context so that you know what the terms mean in that context, because they mean something different from what they mean in another context. Okay, great. Let's see. Yes, as Aubrey says, not just in the case of Om, whatever bīja-mantra you're using, HAUM, HAUM, HRIM, there's no M, sorry, in any of those. No M when you're doing Uchara practice. And Uchara is fundamentally defined as devoting an entire exhale to a single repetition of the bīja-mantra, though there's more details to it. So again, with HRIM, for example, it would be like that. So there's no M in any bija when you're doing Uchara. It's always a pure nasal. For those of you who speak Portuguese or French, this is easy because it is indeed the same pure nasal sound as found in those languages, you know, like the French word for good, bon. It's not bon, B-O-N, it's bon. So N in the writing of French represents a pure nasal in that context. Leah asks, can you speak about Paradevi's bija? No. But if you know Paradevi's bija, you can certainly do it in Uchara practice. It's just that it is that's a whole different thing, because without a nasal sound, Paradevi's bija doesn't have a nasal sound, so it achieves a very different effect. So it's important to also work if you're working with Paradevi's Srishti bija, that you also work with a bija that has a nasal, because that nasal sound is what breaks up the Maya Granthi or Rudra Granthi. Okay, great. See you in a bit for the shorter practice segment. Om.